What's up, guys? Ghetto Kaba here, and I wanted to hear briefly about the war on drugs. You know, when I think of the war on drugs, it makes me think of logical fallacies. And two logical fallacies first come to my mind. And the first obvious one that people use is the slippery slope argument. And so basically, the slippery slope argument works where we take one detestable event and we follow a certain sequence where we say, if this happened, it's going to lead to another event. So we take one event that's detestable, lump it together with an even more detestable one, and then we continue lumping it together with an even worse one. And so many people say, well, drugs are bad because drugs can lead to addiction, which can lead to crime, which can lead to murder, which can lead to people getting high and driving an automobile and killing someone. And so those sort of scenarios are scary. But we use those scenarios intentionally so that we link those issues together, which there's a possibility that those events could happen in that sequence, but there's a possibility that those events could transpire for other reasons, and there's a possibility that they may not even happen. And so they lumped the slippery slope fallacy in with appealing to consequence. And so we lump those categories together, but we lump together a consequence to frighten you. But the consequence may not even have anything to do with the topic that we mentioned. For example, if we say, oh, okay, if you use marijuana, you're going to become an addict. But there's a possibility that you may not become an addict, but if you become an addict, you could become a criminal and you could lose your job and you could kill somebody because of your addiction or start stealing. But those, again, are appealing to consequence. And they tell us, well, look, if you don't support us in this drug war, then you support the drugs. And if you don't support us, you could be the victim of some sort of drug-related crime, which could be murder. You know, and those things doesn't have anything to do with drug addiction. So using the same slippery slope argument that people use on the war on drugs, this is going to be silly, but it's under the same line of logic. So we should make Girl Scout cookies illegal, because Girl Scout cookies could lead to obesity. And if a person becomes obese, there's a possibility that they can become diabetic. And if they become diabetic, it's a possibility that since they're diabetic, they're not going to eat properly. And that since they're a diabetic, they may have a stroke at the wheel, which could lead to the deaths of individuals that are innocent. So since we know eating Girl Scout cookies could result in addiction to food, which could cause obesity, which could cause a failure to manage one's sugar, which could lead to the death of others. Therefore, we should ban Girl Scout cookies. And if we catch anybody with Girl Scout cookies, we're going to arrest you. And by the way, if you don't support us, then you could set yourself up to be killed because someone could have a stroke at the wheel by not managing their sugar. See how ridiculous that slippery slope logic is? But then someone may say, well, listen, that's just Girl Scout cookies. It's not the same as drugs, but now then the person has equivocated by changing the words because it's convenient. Following the same slippery slope argument, we need to protect our kids from we don't want our children addicted to caffeine. So since we don't want our kids addicted to caffeine, which can lead to other drugs, we also need to ban energy drinks because energy drinks could cause someone to OD and it could cause someone to become overly hyper and not be at one's senses. And caffeine is addictive. And as a matter of fact, we should ban, while we're on the subject, we should ban after school sports. because it's a known fact that high school athletes sometimes use steroids. Steroids can lead to steroid rage, which can lead to kidney and heart failure. And as a matter of fact, we need to ban sex. People shouldn't have sex anymore, because if you have sex, you may be tempted to rape someone. And so we know people have sex, they're tempted to rape someone. If you have sex, you may be tempted to commit adultery in your marriage. So we should ban sex while we're at it, because it's your patriotic duty. You see how ridiculous that line of thinking was slippery slope? It's ridiculous. If we applied it in every situation, you couldn't even leave the house. We should ban CVS. As a matter of fact, all CVS should shut down, because CVS sells over-the-counter medication, and it's a possibility our children can be addicted on metamorphines and Benadryl because it makes them go to sleep. You see why it makes no intelligent sense? And when we think about the war on drugs, we have over 1 million people in prison because they're drug users, and because they're addicted to drugs. And what if we took people that had diabetes or certain heart conditions, and we said, well, since they're addicted to food, we'll make them a criminal? This is why this same line of thinking doesn't work. You know, we have people that have drug addictions, and we're making them criminal. You know, even in the Bible days, you know, they had fermented wine, and they enjoy wine, and they altered their consciousness. You know, it's normal human behavior. But what I'm finding interesting is that we take normal human behavior and make it a crime. You know, people say, okay, we giving people rehab, we giving them fines, probation, and even sending people to prison. And even these aren't enough to curb human desire. Should we be doing the same failed policy? You know, and when we look at rehab, probation, you know, it puts unnecessary pressure on people just to tell someone, okay, you have to stop this drug cold turkey. When to the non-drug user, once you begin using certain things, it feels good and your body wants it. And the probation and other things like that, it pressures people into relapsing. You know, and out of the drug users in prison, most people are in jail for possessing small quantities of weed and cocaine. And the Surgeon General has already come out numerous times and said that there hasn't been one person to ever OD off of marijuana. And even cocaine may be a more harsher drug. More people OD every year on prescription drugs than cocaine, at a rate of almost 50 to 1. Nobody's made prescription drugs illegal. But I guess since the drug company own a big chunk of Wall Street, and they have so much influence with the FDA and with politics, we'll just turn the blind eye to it. We don't want you doing your drugs, which are safer. We want you to use our drug so our drug can give you a side effect, and we can give you a diagnosis predicated on your diagnosis, so we can keep giving you drugs which cause other side effects we can diagnose as a disease. You know, every year over 100,000 people OD off prescription drugs. And because you OD, it doesn't mean you're going to have a fatality because of it. So we got 100,000 people ODing on prescription drugs every year. There exists something called iatrogenic disease, whereas over 200,000 people die every year because of medical mistakes. You know, we have less than 10,000 people every year OD off of street drugs, and the government has spent over $1 trillion over the past 30 years in a losing war, whereas you got 300,000 people becoming injured or dying because of medical mistakes and prescription drugs just for no reason. There isn't really much money spent on the war on medical mistakes. Right now, if a person is selling street drugs on the corner, they run the risk of doing 15 to life in jail, whereas you may get a doctor like Conrad Murray or other doctors that practice unscrupulous practices, and the most they get is disbarred, a fine, and no jail time, and their drugs are more dangerous. You know, more people die in the war on drugs than the drug fatalities themselves. You got police officers getting injured. You got innocent people being dragged out of their cars, having numerous constitutional violations being violated just because some police officers suspect that they have drugs. You know, something to think about. You know, in the past 30 years, over $1 trillion has been spent on the war on drugs. You know, just imagine if all of that, if we're tired of free handouts in this country and we're tired of socialism, the $600 billion, the $1 trillion that they spent on the war on drugs, what if that money was spent to send people to college? How much more productive will we have? How much more productivity could society be if we had people taking their creative energies and placing it towards something productive instead locking them up? So I guess the $100 million question that one should ask, why use the same failed policy? Prohibition on liquor didn't work. So let me pause. I'm going to pause this video. It's going to be a two-part series. So I'm going to stop the video, and when part 2 come around, we're going to talk about prohibition and its failure. Thank you.